It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. The mother of all thumpings, the promise from Israel to Hamas after the ceasefire breaks down, with the south of Gaza the focus of the battle ahead. Sleepwalking into a public health crisis. The warning from campaigners about a new breed of synthetic opioids.
Have you been getting any side effects from the drugs that you're taking at the moment?
I've got holes in my legs.
Holes in your legs? Like red sores?
No, it's not. The skin's gone in the hole. The skin is gone.
The Prime Minister pictures the UK as a world leader in climate action, but is overshadowed by the King and his choice of tie. Matt Hancock defends his decision to discharge hospital patients into care homes during the pandemic without testing them for COVID. Some of rugby's biggest stars are named as part of a group bringing legal action, saying the game left them with brain injuries. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Good evening. A week-long ceasefire in the war between Israel and Hamas ended this morning. Each side blamed the other for the resumption of fighting, which has now disrupted the delivery of aid to Gaza and the release of any further Israeli hostages being held. The Israeli military hit targets inside the Strip, including many in the south, with the Israeli government promising that Hamas will now get what it called the mother of all thumpings. The Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry says 109 Palestinians have been killed since fighting began again. Well, it resumed shortly before 5 a.m. this morning. Sirens were first heard in Kibbutz Holet, and Hamas's armed wing says it also launched strikes towards Ashkelon, Sderot and Tel Aviv throughout the day. Meanwhile, in Gaza, strikes were reported across both the north and south, including in the cities of Rafah and Khan Yunis, where civilians had been told to go. Leaflets were dropped across the east of Khan Yunis, warning the residents of Karara, Kuzay, Abbasan al-Kabira and Bani Sohey to leave. The leaflets show a QR code which takes the reader to a map drawn up by the IDF, dividing Gaza into sections, which they say they'll use to warn residents in targeted blocks. Our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, has this report.
For a week, it's been quiet in Gaza. It was, in truth, a passing moment of peace. The streets filled with smoke and dust as bombs began to fall once again. People immediately rushed to search for loved ones and neighbours trapped in the rubble, desperately scrabbling by hand. Houses and apartment blocks smashed to pieces. This had gone on for weeks, but it's back with a vengeance. Sky News teams inside Gaza say the intensity of the attacks is as bad as it ever has been. For civilians caught up in this war, who started it again is probably of little consequence. They just want it all to stop. The bodies of the dead, shrouded in white, were laid together. Such a familiar, sad scene now. A woman, watched on by a little girl, gently stroked the body of a relative. We don't know who it is. In hospitals, staff struggle to deal with a new influx of injured from the bombardment. The medical centres of Gaza are already stretched to breaking point. Israel says Hamas is responsible for this, saying the group fired rockets, breaking the ceasefire.
We were prepared to see the continuation of the ceasefire. But not only did they not keep their commitments, and you can check this with your reporters on the ground, they opened fire. They started shooting rockets at 5:30 this morning into Israel. It's clear that Hamas violated the agreement. It's clear that Hamas started this round of fighting.
With negotiations over extending the ceasefire deadlocked, it was probably inevitable that hostilities would resume.
The Israeli Prime Minister has always said that whatever happens with the hostages, the war in Gaza would resume and would continue until Hamas is destroyed. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be more ceasefires to allow hostages out, but all the indicators are that this is going to be a grinding campaign and there is no end date set.
What happens to the hundreds of thousands in the south of Gaza is the greatest concern for the international community now. Already there is a mass exodus further south, these families leaving the city of Khan Yunis. many on horses and carts or in cars packed full, carrying entire families and any possessions they can cram on board. Others move south on foot.
We're lost. We don't know where to go. We have no relatives in Rafah. We don't know anyone there. We have only our God.
The leaflet dropped by Israeli forces. A QR code links it to an interactive map dividing Gaza into block numbers. The IDF says the map will help residents evacuate. But thousands remain in the north. This school is full of people seeking shelter. It's in the Jabalia refugee camp, far from the relative safety of the south. A fire burns next to the building after an Israeli airstrike. As the fighting intensifies, they simply can't move. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Southern Israel.
Well, in a moment, we'll hear from our US correspondent Mark Stone in Washington. But first, our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle, who joins me now from Ashkelon in southern Israel. And Alistair, what's the situation there tonight?
Well, all day there's been very heavy fighting from both sides. I mean, shortly after the truce broke down at 7 o'clock this morning, local time, the Israelis resumed airstrikes across Gaza, mainly focusing on the north from what we could see, but also striking targets in the south, particularly the city of Khan Yunis, which I think will be a focus of their fighting in the days and weeks ahead. But we witnessed airstrikes and artillery strikes in northern Gaza pretty constantly through much of the afternoon into the evening, and then a very heavy barrage over the last few hours from Hamas into Israel, into Sderot, into towns like where we are now in Ashkelon, which is Hamas's way of showing that they're not defeated. They're still there, despite Israel's immense pressure over the last 7 and a bit weeks, almost 8 weeks now. Hamas are still in the fight, and that is why, of course, from an Israeli point of view, they still have work to do, and that is what they now want to get on with. I wouldn't rule out further truces in the future, but I think as things stand tonight, that looks very unlikely, at least in the imminent hours. And so the fighting continues, as of this minute, and Israel is now looking to focus its military operations into the south of Gaza.
And Mark, the US was urging moderation if and when the truce ended. Now that it has, what's their assessment?
Well, look, frankly, it looks as though American influence, again, is not as President Biden would hope that it was. It is clear that the Israelis are going to push south, are going to bomb areas in the south that they believe are legitimate targets. I think there are two distinct focuses to look at tonight. One is the humanitarian aid that is getting in. Now, remember that before the truce, so during that 7-week period or so where the fighting was ongoing, the aid into Gaza was about 3% of pre-war levels. So at a time when aid is most needed during a war, only 3% of the amount of aid that was getting in before the war was getting in. During that truce, it went up to about 40%. Now it has gone down, as of today, back down to 3%. Now, the White House said today that they hope that it will go up again, that it will go up maybe to the period, the amount that it was in before the war. But there's no sign of that happening. The Israelis who I've been speaking to today, the officials here in Washington at the embassy, don't seem to suggest that it would go up. So an acute shortage of aid, an acute need for those people who are on the ground. The other issue is, where do they go? It has been clear throughout this conflict that they do not have anywhere safe to go. Of course, they cannot leave Gaza. The south, Khan Yunis, Rafah, is where they're told to go. But then when the Israelis say they find terrorists in those areas, they then say those areas become legitimate targets and they strike them. Now, today, this grid system has been announced. But again, in a practical sense, it's very hard to know how that's going to work. I mean, remember that the internet is turned on and off. A QR code is pretty useless if you haven't got any internet. That said, the internet does seem to be on at the moment. I spoke to someone there just an hour or so ago. But that grid system just allows people to move from one 100-metre square block to another 100-metre square block. It is extremely hard to see how people are able to survive, able to move, if Israel does to the south what it has already done to the north.
Mark in Washington and Alistair in Ashkelon. Thank you both. And coming up later on in the programme, we'll show you the secrets of the tunnels below the Gaza hospital that's become a key battleground in the war. Now, drug campaigners have told Sky News that the UK risks sleepwalking into a public health emergency over synthetic opioids. They say a crackdown by the Taliban on heroin production in Afghanistan means dealers here are now mixing their dwindling supplies with the synthetics, which can be up to 300 times stronger than heroin. Our home editor, Jason Farrell, has this exclusive report.
Rush hour in East London. Peak time for the young woman we'll call Charlotte in the green hooded top to earn enough change for her next hit.
Have you been getting any side effects from the drugs that you're taking at the moment?
I've got holes in my legs.
Holes in your legs? Like red sores?
No, it's not. The skin's gone in the hole. The skin is gone.
Do you think that, there's something new in the drugs that's causing that?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And if you're using crack every day...
Outreach workers say this is just one symptom of a terrifying change in the drug market. A growing prevalence of deadly synthetic opioids cut into drugs like heroin.
She's literally frozen.
Here, a young woman is slumped unconscious on the pavement after drug use.
Somebody's child.
Abdi says the Taliban crackdown on heroin production in Afghanistan means dealers here are replacing it with even more potent synthetics. And the deadliest, called nitazines, are the newest killer on the streets.
There is a much more higher risk, in some cases by 100, of overdose and death.
Do you worry it's more dangerous?
It is. It is.
Heroin user Rebel says she's noticed a change. Health workers have run urine tests and warned her of other substances cut into her drugs.
I don't want to die a junkie.
These people are in it for money, are they not? Yeah. And the purer it is, the less money they make. So obviously they're putting stuff in with it. I'm seeing people coughing up blood. I'm seeing people dying.
Should I have a stroll down your lovely wing?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's also been a spike in nitazine overdoses in the West Midlands.
Hi, Billy. My name's Steve. I'm one of the nurses.
Steve is on a mission to help people get off the drugs that are causing them to offend. His place of work, police cells in Birmingham.
Have you heard of nitrazines or fentanyl?
I've heard of fentanyl from America.
Okay, so these are synthetic opiates, but they're causing a lot of people to die from overdose.
Killing a lot of people,
yeah.
Fentanyl is America's leading narcotic, 50 times stronger than heroin, a major cause of overdose death there. Nitazines are up to 300 times stronger than heroin.
I will leave some naloxone with your belongings, and it will come with a little leaflet.
Naloxone injections are an antidote for an opioid overdose.
So you twist to open it.
And this is the first time ever it's started to be handed out in police cells.
Inject into the thigh.
The charity running this unique scheme says there needs to be an urgent national response to nitazines.
We're kind of sleepwalking our way into what I would deem to be a crisis, and we're not prepared for it in the UK at all.
This week, 15 new synthetic opioids were categorised as Class A drugs. But that doesn't make them any easier for drug users to detect until it's too late. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Rishi Sunak insisted that the UK can stand tall at the COP28 climate summit in Dubai, despite the government scaling back a host of green pledges at home. But his positive message wasn't echoed by his monarch. Sky Science and Technology editor Tom Clark reports now from Dubai.
They left heavy carbon footprints getting here. But a gathering of this many world leaders is a clear statement of collective intent to act on climate change. That said, it happens every year and carbon emissions are still rising.
King Charles III.
Something not lost on the King, who addressed leaders at the climate summit for the first time as head of state.
Our choice now is a starker and darker one. How dangerous are we actually prepared to make our world? After all, ladies and gentlemen, In 2050, our grandchildren won't be asking what we said. They will be living with the consequences of what we did or didn't do.
A sense of humility not quite echoed in his Prime Minister's address that focused on the UK's leadership.
That's why we've decarbonised faster than any other major economy. Our 2030 target means the deepest cuts of any major emitter, and we're determined to deliver.
The UK came to Dubai with extra cash for the climate and a big diplomatic presence. But here at COP, Mr Sunak's move to water down net zero targets and his language around them has raised questions about the UK as a climate leader. Do we have our work cut out now to re-establish our reputation as a leader?
We've got an unbelievably strong record.
The rhetoric doesn't
never mind the rhetoric. We have cut carbon emissions by 50%. That's faster than any major country, and our ambition for the next period is again faster than any major country.
The Foreign Secretary told me to forget the rhetoric, but we're at a climate summit surrounded by experts who pay very close attention to the language around climate policy. And just because Rishi Sunak's rowback on net zero policies was targeted at a domestic audience, it doesn't mean the rest of the world didn't notice. Mohammed Adal works to switch African countries on to clean energy.
UK isn't trusted anymore. There was commitment from the UK, not just in the UK, but internationally, with the leadership they provided in 2021. A lot of that is now lost. The world follows what the UK does. And on climate, the UK is actually losing a lot of ground.
Increasing ambition here would help the UK re-establish trust among its peers. And with 12 days left of this summit, there's still time to do it. Tom Clark, Sky News, Dubai.
Well, after the King and Prime Minister met, Rishi Sunak posted this photo with the King's choice of tie raising eyebrows. Bearing images of the Greek flag, it follows the recent diplomatic row over the Elgin marbles. But it's not clear whether the Prime Minister noticed. The monarch's late father was born a Prince of Greece, and despite speculation His Majesty might have been sending a subtle message, the palace have claimed it was just a coincidence. Matt Hancock has defended his decision to discharge hospital patients into care homes during the pandemic without first testing them for coronavirus. Our health correspondent Ashish Joshi reports on Mr Hancock's second day of testimony at the COVID inquiry.
We had to stand on the step and wish him a happy birthday, and that was as far as we could get.
Anne's brother Robert died after catching COVID in a care home. She came to the inquiry to find out why he and more than 45,000 other vulnerable care home residents were not protected. Under a second day of questioning, former Health Secretary Matt Hancock defended a decision to allow hospital patients to be discharged into care homes without being tested.
Without testing anybody, Mr Hancock, you don't know whether they're positive or asymptomatic or negative.
Indeed, but we didn't have enough tests. I fear that if we had left those patients in hospital, those who were medically fit to discharge, there is a high likelihood that more would have caught COVID and the problem could have been bigger.
The inquiry was shown a message sent in April from Hancock's then advisor, Jamie Njogu Goodwin, concerned about the lack of testing people in care. But he also describes people dying in care homes as often near the end regardless. Hancock defended his team's record.
Nobody has yet brought to me a solution to this problem that I think, even with hindsight, would have resulted in more lives saved.
Hancock describes the culture in government during the pandemic as toxic, saying it stopped him from doing his work.
We know that number 10 was chaotic. That's coming through loud and clear in the evidence. I'm not interested in the personalities. We need to understand why our government failed our people.
Hancock will have more questions to answer when the inquiry focuses on care homes. But next week, the same questions will be put to the former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. Ashish Joshi, Sky News, at the COVID inquiry.
Well, as the UK deals with the aftermath of the COVID pandemic, China is grappling with another surge in respiratory illnesses in children, including pneumonia. Sky's Asia correspondent Helen Smith reports from Beijing.
In China's hospitals, the patients keep coming and coming. Children mostly, thousands of them, suffering from a surge of pneumonia, flu and respiratory bugs. At this hospital in Beijing, pre-booked appointments are now impossible. The only option is to wait, sometimes for hours, and take what precautions they can. Outside, we meet Jiang Romin and her 10-year-old grandson, Zhang Zhishun. He's been badly ill for over a week and has been back here multiple times. They've not found a cause for his fever. We've tried all types of medicine and it's not helped, she says. Every day he has a fever as high as 38, 39, even 40 degrees. Of course I'm worried. He can't go to school, he can't go anywhere. The official messaging is to take care but don't panic. Avoid a rush to the hospital if you can.
The severity of the illness shows no particular change compared to the past. Treatment follows conventional methods, the vast majority of which are effective.
But people have worried. These are some similar scenes across China. Similar fears over what was initially being termed a mysterious, undiagnosed pneumonia. It was concerning enough. The World Health Organization publicly asked China for more information. Both now insist there is no new virus at play. Busy hospitals are not as unusual in China. There isn't a GP equivalent here, and people are much quicker to present at hospital. But nonetheless, these scenes evoke memories of what people saw here during the pandemic. And although China's health authorities and the WHO say there's nothing new to worry about this time, many are sceptical because of their history of cover-up and complacency. A repeat of this is what everyone fears. China tried to hide the start of both COVID and SARS. But the pandemic is likely also the cause of what's happening now. Long, harsh lockdowns left children unexposed and immunity low.
Fortunately, most of these infections are still relatively mild, and so immunity can be conferred by these infections without any undue level of severity. But because it's so common at the moment, they have been seeing very high rates of hospitalization.
China's not reported any deaths yet, but experts say they're possible. A system not succumbing, but strained and under pressure to this time tell the truth. Helen Smith, Sky News in Beijing.
Train drivers have voted overwhelmingly to keep striking over the next 6 months. Mick Whelan, the boss of their union, ASLEF, says members are in this for the long haul as they battle the government over pay and conditions. Another series of overtime bans and strikes starts tomorrow. Republican Congressman George Santos has been expelled from the US House of Representatives following a damning report from the House Ethics Committee. He's facing criminal corruption charges and accusations of misspending campaign money on trips to Las Vegas, Botox and designer clothes. The 35-year-old, who denies any wrongdoing, is only the 6th person ever to be expelled from the House. Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza has become a battleground in the war, which has now resumed. A war where winning the battle for global opinion is a key priority. Israeli forces say they're searching for what they say is a Hamas headquarters hidden beneath the hospital, a claim that Hamas and hospital staff have repeatedly denied. Our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire reports now on his team's efforts to map the secrets lying below ground.
Al-Shifa, the biggest hospital in Gaza City, and from the start of the war, a key objective for the Israeli military. They said it was used by Hamas in violation of international law as a command center, a claim Hamas denies. The hospital became part of the physical conflict, but also a key battleground in the information war being waged by both sides. Using footage from the Israeli military, open source intelligence, including satellite imagery, and interviews with doctors on the ground, Sky News has created a 3D model to show what we know and what we don't about the hospital and the tunnels that lie beneath it. The most significant piece of evidence so far from the Israel Defense Forces, or IDF, is footage of an alleged Hamas tunnel located on the eastern edge of the hospital, posted on the 17th of November. On our model, you can first see the MRI building. The IDF said they found small arms here. We can't verify that claim independently. Next, the surgery building, where the IDF said hostages from Israel were taken after the October the 7th terrorist attack. This video is an exact match for pre-existing imagery of the building, and the timestamp of the CCTV matches the time of the attacks. Let's go underground now. Using distinctive features in the IDF footage, such as the position of beams and concrete slabs, we've modelled the spiral staircase. Our model tallies with the IDF claim that the tunnel is 6 meters below ground. This corridor runs until it meets a heavy blast door. The IDF subsequently released footage 3 days later, on the 21st of November, showing that they had opened that door. Now, Israel itself has admitted it did build underground rooms when the hospital was constructed, but experts tell us that these tunnels are much more rudimentary.
Demolition tools, power tools probably could excavate the tunnels in the way it's been illustrated in the footage. They were probably seen maybe a few centimeters everyday advancement.
The tunnel then leads to the edge of the hospital's surgery building. The IDF excavated their own hole to explore this. Here, 4 rooms and a sink area are seen. The IDF claims this area was used for complex living. It contains tiled rooms with toilets, electrical wires, and another with metal frames resembling either benches or beds. Doctors who've worked at Al-Shifa have told Sky News that Hamas was not using the hospital. Now, all of this is deeply contentious, ideologically, morally, and legally. Because if Hamas did use the hospital, well, that could be a war crime. And if Israel attacked a hospital without justification, well, that would also be a war crime. The site is still under Israeli control. More evidence may or may not emerge. Tom Cheshire, Sky News.
World Cup winner Phil Vickery and former Wales star Gavin Henson are amongst hundreds of former rugby players who've begun legal action against the sport's governing bodies over what they say are life-changing head injuries caused by the game. Our sports correspondent Rob Harris reports.
It's my gym where there's lots of memories.
All Alex Popham has now are the photos.
Every boy's dream to play in a World Cup, obviously proud that I did.
Rugby gave him these memories. He blames rugby for taking them away from him.
I don't remember playing in certain games, and that's the same with a lot of players, unfortunately. My brain was so inflamed because I was doing so much contact. Well, it was 2019 that I was having a lot of struggles. Then had 9 months of thorough testing before I got diagnosed in April 2020 with early onset dementia.
The neurological damage Popham suffered now part of landmark legal action, with his former Wales star teammate Gavin Henson among 226 players waiving their anonymity. Phil Vickery among 3 England World Cup winners suing rugby authorities. But their bid to combine concussion cases into a group action will now drag into next year at the High Court.
The delay is dreadful. It's dreadful for the individuals concerned because you will see from the descriptions the injuries that many of them have suffered. They're managing without any financial support at the moment, and some of them, have had suicidal ideations and are really in a very bad way.
This could be a watershed moment that shapes the future of rugby. How safe is the sport and how safe can it be? The players will have to show their brain injuries were caused by negligence and the lack of action by the sport to protect them. Medical records will be required to show head traumas cause conditions including CTE, dementia, epilepsy and Parkinson's disease.
Could this case destroy rugby?
No, I don't think so, but unless the changes are made, it could.
Changes that will be required from World Rugby to show welfare is their top priority. Alex Popham gave his body for rugby. Did too many players like him unknowingly give their minds? Rob Harris, Sky News.
Large parts of the UK are expecting more snow and ice this weekend. The Met Office has issued new weather warnings across Scotland and stretching from northern England down the east coast until 10 tomorrow morning. In Gateshead, the Angel of the North statue was dusted with snow, while the wintry weather tempted families to go sledging and dog walkers to venture out. While in Kent, snow fell heavily for a time, carpeting the landscape with freezing temperatures, allowing it to settle. But will we have a white Christmas? Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the broadcaster and commentator Ali Muraj and Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the Financial Times, their headline, Israel digs in for year-long Gaza war. We'll be discussing that and other stories when we come back. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with broadcaster and commentator Ali Miraj and Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the FT leads with the Gaza war, suggesting Israel may be planning for a year-long offensive. The Guardian says Israel will be escalating the war with a ground attack in the south of Gaza after the truce was suspended. And in the Mail, a report says thousands of children will be skipping school to go on protests in support of Palestine. The Times predict Boris Johnson will be apologising next week when he gives evidence to the COVID inquiry. Don't believe doubters, says the Daily Express, as senior officials insist the government's Rwanda deal is still on, despite numerous legal challenges. The Telegraph leads on the royal book row as pressure mounts on Prince Harry to speak out on the issue. And Endgame is the headline for The Sun, as it claims the royals face a split beyond repair. The Eye leads with an investigation into how tobacco companies are lobbying the Prime Minister to avoid an outright smoking ban. Some MPs are urging viewers to boot Nigel Farage out of the jungle. That's according to The Mirror. And the Daily Star suggests we should be kinder to bald people. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Ali Miraj and Susie Boniface. And I felt your eyes burning when I read that last story on the Star.
At least there's an upside of being on this press preview tonight. You're being kind to me. Be kind to me, Susie.
Well, let's turn to much more serious issues now. The front page of The Guardian we'll start with, and the escalation of the war, the end of the truce that has now ended as of this morning. Ali?
Well, the 7-day truce has ended. We knew it would end at some point. There was some hope that it could be extended, but sadly, that has not come to pass. Obviously, there have been hostage releases on both sides. And Israel wants to make sure that it achieves a number of things. It wants to decapitate Hamas's leadership. It wants to ensure that it is completely eradicated as a force. And it wants to ensure that this can never happen again. Its entire underground tunnel infrastructure is also reduced completely to rubble, which is understandable given that heinous attack that took place on October the 7th. But Israel also needs to think about what comes after this, and I think that there's insufficient planning going on about that. The Guardian is reporting that the US has got very limited sway over Benjamin Netanyahu, who is under a lot of pressure himself. The New York Times had done an expose saying that he was warned months ago by his own defense chiefs that his complete obsession with all this nonsense going on within Israel, domestic politics, was reducing focus on the military strategy, security issues, and it was actually helping Israel's foes. That's certainly the case, and there has to be sufficient thought given to what comes after this and what peace looks like, because 2 million Gazans are not going to be going anywhere. All that's going to happen here potentially is you are going to have derivatives of Hamas coming up who are completely disgruntled. So that has to be part of the solution.
And Susie, if we look at the FT weekend, their headline, Israel digs in for year-long Gaza war, the suggestion that this is not going to be over anytime soon, and the point that Ali was making, that there is no plan for what happens after, and certainly there isn't any talk of peace at this moment.
Well, the talk that's happening, the rhetoric that's going on is that obviously the truce has collapsed. There have been missiles fired on both sides. Netanyahu's government is talking about they have leafleted in Khan Yunis in the south of Gaza in order to suggest people move even further south to avoid what looks like they're going to be stepping up the ground war there. And saying that, we don't have, as it says in the FT, we have not yet met our objectives, which include killing some of the top 3 leaders and seriously degrading about 24 Hamas battalions that they believe are operating in Gaza. They say that actually they've sort of damaged about 10 of those 24 battalions. They haven't done nearly enough. They've killed some mid-level commanders, dozens of them, but they haven't got to the top guys, and there's plenty more they want to do. Now, unfortunately, Ali's wrong in saying those Gazans aren't going anywhere, because if they follow the Israeli Defence Forces instructions, they're all going to be moving south and eventually end up somewhere near the border, if not across the border into Egypt, across the Rafah crossing. You've also got a situation where the Israeli government is mostly armed by the US government. If Joe Biden says you have to stop doing what you're doing, then eventually Israel does run out of armaments. So Biden does have the ability to control it. He doesn't appear to have exerted that ability yet. But you've got the clock running down, really, on international global patience with the way this conflict is going. And like Ali said, if you don't have an idea of where you're going to end up and what peace looks like, if you can't have total, complete destruction of an enemy, which never happens with a terror group, never happens when people are fighting for a homeland, then you have to have some kind of a way to get to a compromise. And Netanyahu's government is under a huge amount of pressure at home. That's not in any of these pieces, but he's under a huge amount of pressure from the family of those 100 or so hostages who have not been released, from the families of those hostages who have been killed as a result of the airstrikes or as a result of Hamas activity. And there is the lot of this rhetoric that's coming out of Netanyahu and his government is, we're going to carry on, we're going to fight, because that's what they have to say politically.
Well, he's also bruised
at home.
He's also been very bruised because Netanyahu was the hard man of Israeli security, and he's been found absolutely wanting. This is the most egregious failure on Israeli security policy for generations. So it's very embarrassing for him. But I do think that Israel also has to be very careful in its use of language. You hear Eli Cohen, the defense minister, saying that the territory of Gaza will be reduced after this. And you look at what's happening in the West Bank with Palestinian farmers being moved on from their homes. Israel has to be very careful because it had the moral high ground, and it is absolutely right that it has a right to defend itself. But the manner in which it prosecutes that is also very important. And 15,000 people have already died who have had nothing to do with Hamas, quite frankly. And I do think she's absolutely right that international patience will wear thin.
Mm-hmm. And that's what America has been impressing upon Israel, the manner in which...
I mean, Israel's talking about we've got another year to go in Gaza before we hit all our objectives. There is no way the international community will stand this for a year.
Let's have a look at the Times and the COVID inquiry. The headline there is from Boris Johnson, "My COVID decision saved lives." This is what he's expected to say to the inquiry next week.
Well, he's going to be up in front of the COVID inquiry. We know that a number of people have already been up there, including a number of ministers. We had Matt Hancock as well. And Boris Johnson is essentially going to say that, with hindsight, they could have acted potentially a little bit quicker, I guess, than they could have. But he's not going to say that any of the lockdowns happened at the wrong time. He's going to completely defend that. He's also going to say that tensions at the heart of government were a good thing, that U-turn showed flexibility. I mean, some of the testimony that we've heard so far shows a completely dysfunctional government led by a prime minister that was utterly inept for this crisis. Now, let's cut the prime minister some slack, or the former PM some slack, that this was a once-in-a-100-year event. But he was not the right personality type to deal with it. So it's going to be trying to defend, trying to make sure that his legacy is not completely, utterly tarnished by all of this. But what people will remember is those parties going on in Downing Street when people were locked down, with the Queen at her own husband's funeral, abiding by the rules when people in Downing Street were partying. And also, I'll never forget this, just before the first lockdown happened, when he actually came on a podium and said, "You must be prepared to lose your loved ones before their time." I remember calling my mother straight away saying, "You shall not leave the house from this moment forward." I thought this guy's a complete nutter. I mean, I never heard of... I mean, there was no advice to anyone about what to do. It's just like, oh, be prepared to see your loved ones die.
Yeah. Well, talking in here, I mean, this seems to be... So before people appear at the COVID inquiry, they make a statement which gets published to the press in the days before. Now, it seems to be that the Times journalists have had an early sight of what Boris Johnson's statement is going to say. So it's very one-sided. It's all about his view of things. And a lot of stuff in here is, he is going to say, he is said to believe, all the rest of it, and a few quotes here and there. So it's very much Boris Johnson's version of events. Now, one of the things he says is that all those 3 lockdowns came at exactly the right time. He also says that he The key date was February the 28th, 2020, when he became alarmed by the spread of the virus and realised that a lockdown was going to have to happen. Now, the first lockdown didn't happen for nearly a month after that. So there was a month. And I can recall quite clearly at the beginning of March, when I could see what was happening in the papers, we could see what was happening in China and in Italy. We all could. I remember going home to my parents and saying, do I come to live with you or do you come to live with me? Because we decided to bubble before that was a word. I decided I wasn't coming into London because that was the place where I'd get the infection and bring it home. And so that was a week or two before there was a national lockdown announced, and we were already aware that it was coming. Now, if we were aware in Kent, then there is... And the Prime Minister apparently knew a fortnight before that. Why did we not lock down to the end of March? We're still going to say it was in time.
Susie, we've also got to mention this killer line.
Just very quickly before
that Boris Johnson says he will argue that he had a basic confidence that things would turn out all right, based on the fallacious logic that health threats such as BSC and SARS had not proved as catastrophic as feared.
Right, we've just got to move on. We've only got 1 minute left. Very, very quickly.
He says that people would have gone against the advice and would have all the region are mucking about. They wouldn't have stuck with the rules and everything. But it was Barnard Castle that meant people lost faith in the government and what happened there.
Right. Let's get to the Daily Telegraph now. And this is the royal story, that book. Telegraph suggesting that the pressure is now on Harry to actually speak out. Ali.
Well, I mean, look, it's very unedifying, this whole thing. It goes back to that Oprah Winfrey interview when Meghan revealed that a senior royal figure had questioned what the colour of her baby would be when it was born. It now appears that there are a couple of them, and it's being written about here that it's the King and it's the Princess of Wales. Now, I don't think there's any love lost now between the King and Prince Harry, quite frankly. I think that it looks like that relationship is irretrievably broken down, to coin a phrase. And it really is very, very sad to see this all being played out in public. Is it racist to wonder about what a kid would look like? I don't know.
They were probably saying, is he going to be ginger? And who hasn't asked questions like that?
That's the real story. Susie and Ali, thank you very much for the moment. We are going to take a break coming up. Don't believe doubters, says the Daily Express, as senior officials insist the government's Rwanda deal is still on. Do stay with us.
Martha Kellner, and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
It's turning everybody into, a crazy, violent drug addict.
How are you feeling? I am angry.
It is an anti-woman agenda.
2 women say that you paid for their abortions. Are you a hypocrite, sir? Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
I gotta be realistic. My sister's dead.
More than 4 weeks on, there's no murder weapon and no suspect. Are you going to catch this killer?
We are doing everything we can.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
We're so excited.
Severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
I've watched as whole towns were torn apart by natural disaster.
I'm alive and I'm thankful for that, but there are a lot of people who aren't.
It's not the winds people fear most here, it's the water. we take you to the heart of the stories which shape our world. Do you truly believe what you're saying?
A lot of cases that I know are reported from Ukrainian missiles themselves.
Ambassador, with respect, I think that's preposterous.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, broadcaster and commentator Ali Miraj and the Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface. Let's have a look at the front page of the Daily Express and the Rwanda story back in the news. Don't believe the doubters. Rwanda migrant deal is on. Who is saying this, and how do we know it to be true, Ali?
Well, I mean, this is a spokesperson for the Rwandan government has vowed to fight baseless criticism of its asylum system. And obviously the mood music coming out of Number 10 or the briefings are that they are going to go full steam ahead and try and get this Rwanda plan off the ground. But I never thought I'd come on the press preview and quote Elvis. But frankly, I think it's a little less conversation, a little more action, please, because we keep hearing this nonsense from this government about the fact that it marches us all the way up the hill, like the Grand Old Duke of York, and all the way back down again. It never, ever delivers. Now, the Supreme Court, this has been going on in the courts for the best part of a year, the Supreme Court banged this to rights. It said, look, we're not comfortable that Rwanda is a safe country. We're not comfortable that people are not going to be actually sent back to their countries of origin and potentially facing persecution. This is out of order. But it's not only withdrawing from the European Convention on Human Rights, which is now the new silver bullet that Robert Jenrick and others are pointing to. We also are members of international conventions like the UN Refugee Convention. There's international law at stake here. So I do not think a single plane is going to take off before the next election with anyone going to Rwanda anytime soon. It's a very expensive policy. I was willing to give it the benefit of the doubt. I really was. I was behind it. But it's time to just call it quits. It's not going to work.
Well, speaking in Dubai, even as he's at COP, Rishi Sunak saying that the Rwanda plan was crucial to solving the migrant crisis, but refused to say whether he was willing to take the most extreme measures in order to push the plan through.
Well, one would have thought that one extreme measure to solving the migrant crisis might be talking to the Greek Prime Minister, who happens to know quite a lot more about and is closer to the migrant crisis than Rishi Sunak. But obviously, he wasn't prepared to go that far. The problem with the Rwanda plan, and what you've got here, they're talking about, as Ali says, being able to ignore the European Convention on Human Rights or perhaps the Human Rights Act, is the fact that in order to do... Firstly, if you do that, a load of our post-Brexit trade deals are going to collapse because they are predicated upon the fact that we share certain similarities with the countries that we do those deals with. And if suddenly we start regressing in terms of human rights, those deals get rewritten or collapse, and that's that. The other thing is that although there are about 20 MPs in the very sort of noisy common sense group end of the Conservative Party who really want the Rwanda plan, who really want to withdraw human rights from refugees and so on, there's about 110 MPs who are in the One Nation caucus who are a little bit more moderate and who will never, under any circumstances, vote for legislation which would withdraw any part of Britain or British processes from the Human Rights Act, the European Convention on Human Rights. And so if Rishi Sunak really wants to push for this, to say, I want to withdraw the right of judicial review, I want to withdraw human rights, his own government will collapse. I'll predict it right here and right now. If he goes for this Rwanda plan and has to make it happen, he will have such a massive rebellion on his hand from 110 of his own MPs, probably, or somewhere near that number, that he would find that his government collapses. And he has to go to the government
you're predicting tonight.
Yes.
We've just got 1 minute, Ali. We want to get to the King's tie. This is in the Guardian.
Isn't it awful?
I think he looks very dapper.
This story.
I think King Charles, his tailoring is always immaculate. I think he looks very dapper. Obviously, it's a Greek flag on the tie. There's been a whole row going on about this refusal of Rishi Sunak to meet the Greek Prime Minister over the Elgin marbles or the Parthenon sculptures, call it what you will. I think that was very bad on Rishi Sunak's part because this isn't playground politics. You've got to be an international statesman. Sometimes you have to meet people and have these conversations behind closed doors. The Greeks, they've been going on about the Elgin marbles for decades. It's not a new thing.
200 years or so.
Well, exactly.
But
very quickly, does King know exactly what he was doing?
He knew exactly what he was doing, but can I just say, as a photosensitive epileptic, it really strobes. And I wish that it wasn't sort of being flashed up in my face all the time.
Look away, Susie. Susie and Ali, thanks so much. We'll see you in the next hour. Let's have a look at the weather for you now. A cold weekend is in store with a risk of freezing fog, icy stretches and further wintry showers of rain, hail, sleet and snow. Most places will have a frosty start to Saturday with some dense freezing fog patches. There'll be some wintry showers near windward coast and a risk of icy stretches. Some of the freezing fog patches will linger through the day, keeping temperatures down. Otherwise, the morning will be largely dry but cold with plenty of sunny spells. Wintry showers will again mainly affect coastal areas but are likely to push further inland later on. As the showers push further east into parts of Ireland and Western Britain, snow will mainly fall over the hills. However, as temperatures drop on Saturday night, the showers will turn more wintry, allowing snow to reach lower levels. It remains cold on Sunday, especially where any freezing fog lingers across Northern Ireland.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The 5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.